Welcome back to our program, everyone. We're moving into the second part of our program today, and I think that Mdletshe and Sisonke and Gail really brought us into this idea of rethinking what banishment means, and particularly rethinking what Winnie's time at Brandford meant. And that leads us and ushers us into our third film for today, which is called Winnie, the Banishment, by Twiki Matiwana and Palesa Sibia of Big Bear Productions.
I think my whole life has been a tremendous inspiration. It was because of that adversity that we are what we are today. And if I had to relive my life all over again, if in order that my own children and my children's children wouldn't go through what I've gone through, if I had to go through the same thing, I would do it all over again.
This was a letter written by Winnie Mandela to Nora, that's me, 17 November 1979. Our dearest friends, at the completion of my third year in exile, I have reflected about those who have made it possible for me to pull through this difficult time. So without you, I could have failed, because I knew that now I had a pillar on which I could lean, pillars which gave me the necessary miracle and the strength to maintain one's dignity. This is just a note to thank you for making it possible for me to know that I belong. Igama lami ke nginguNomafa Nora Ahluthi. Ngo-1977 thina we're not told about ngalo Winnie. Ukufika kwakhe ke eBrandford nathi andithi kwafika nje big truck bamdampa nje, uyabona. So ke uliyana ngale mzuzu efika, everybody was curious. Le kwapha bethula bani? So sacinga ke uqesha bathula amapolisa kuba ngamapolisa ayamba ngetruck, and uyathetha ngosilumntu esiXhosa. Hamba naba intombi yakhe ikhona le uzinziswa. Ngenani uthethela phezulu, andithi umthetho wakhe. Fakana phasi izinto kodwa engekho bright and ubona ba akwazeki bakwenzeka ntona.
She can't do much except go to the phone, which is the only form of communication with the outside world. She can't leave Brandford, and that house is so dusty. The living conditions there are really terrible that we spend most of the time cleaning and disinfecting that house.
Winnie Mandela's current banning order runs out at the end of 1981, but that doesn't mean much because the Minister of Justice can renew the ban as often as he chooses.
Winnie was placed 802. Mna ke bendihlala back opposite yakhe 806 kwakwam. Xa ndiya emsebenzini esikolweni ndifuna ndigqithe apha, andinandlela yimbi, ndifuna igqithe apha kwaWinnie. So abelungu ke bona nabazali abancedisa abelungu ezi-domestic servants babesazi bathi babalayiba kunomfazi olapha eBrandford, ningake nilinge nisondele kuye, ningambulisi, ningamthethisi, likomonisi, uba ngaba nifuna ukusebenza. Now uwina kukuba ungangamthethisi umuntu omnyama, ubugqitha pha uza kukhwasa, and uyakubulisa, ubulisa kuqala. Sakubona nkosikazi. Le ndlu isenyula built ntoni yayingekho, kwakuzezinto ezinje zonke ne. Nami kwami kuphaya ipompo ebisetyenziswa ngumama, amanzi adithi sidibanyela 5 boku 1 2 3 4 5 ngami ne, sisebenzisa itap eyi1 ilapha straight egate kwami. Umama uzoma apha ne uphethe imbiza angayime apha kule ndawo ephethe imbiza mna ke sendisazi uba ufuna amanzi now bantwana ke benza izinto phambi kwakhe babaleke bahambe bazawubaleka bagqithe ndizawucela uthumunyana mwekesi ndicela uthetha nasi eAmerica kumama okanye uthathe iAmerica umkhelela amanzi then uwagalele embizeni mntanam njebe mepha nje ezeke ezunyana njebe siza nje laa ntatyana iseBason Kop uyabona so ke phaya iserene andithi ilila ngo-9 o'clock abantu bahlele ngesitrateni phaya phezulu uPrince lo nabangane necolleagues zakhe bahleli phaa daily bafika early begade everything andithi bayafeshkeke lapha entabeni umuntu ongena apha bayambona so ke bayifensa idyadi kamama not only idyadi yena saba nalo lakhe kube sonke apha safumana ifensi yamahala because of mama usuka apha eqadi kwenzela uba bazombona umuntu ongena apha because we're not supposed allowed to get in and ndandiziva uba andinamsebenzi nabo ngoba andenzanga akho nto endiyenzileyo qha nendimbona andithi njengoba wakengena the rural kitchen utensils njenganjene ukuba ngaba ufuna mhlawumbi uboleka iketile ubeka eprimary stove ndizothatha iketile if my son ngokusenza standard 5 6 iprimary level akekho mina ambona kumamani nazinto so ke nami ndinceda umuntu osenhlungwini eyinkosikazi.
I get really emotional when I think about Umama Winnie because I think that woman was really taken for granted. I think she wasn't appreciated enough. I think Umama was a remarkable woman, a remarkable leader, that had so many odds against her, in the particularly in the space that she was in. And we experienced that as well, But I mean, at that time, she was literally, there were other women leaders, but she was the woman leader of the time and was a threat, to be honest, to the patriarchs who were trying to drive the apartheid. She was resilient and she was powerful, she was fearless, and she spoke out.
The president of White House, go upper local. Remember the matters Manyanos. Now, also say over curious, I make it in Coscas, Kaume Umsusan, Nenzanton, upper Lamakoskas Gale organization. No, we are visiting the sick, Sibanite, Nabanda Batala, Siabatlinela, Sibamba meetings once the younger, give it. At ungandivumela ndikwazise kwi-friends zam ii-friends zam zingancedisana wasebenzisana nabo ndithi ke mna khawume ndizawubuza andithi kaloku likomunisile ngoko sabe ngokuyaphutshuka ngoku idrati lamakhonzo ngaloo ndlela sabambana ke well after 2 days afika itrakhi enkulu ke ngoku indiphathela umgubo ngaba bangani bakhe bekethe uzandi-introduce kuhlobo bakhe amabisi abantwana yawu into zizawuqonda nangoku aba bangani bakhe basipha iyard i-roll ezimnyama i-material emnyama ne sizothunga ne-harri zokuthunga basipha i-machine zokuthunga right hayi saqhubeka ngosathunga yeyi kwi-region ngoku siyawina ihlale i-Brandfort rural township imisebenzi yabo emkhulu. This is the orphanage of which now it was established through those of Winnie's efforts in Brandfort. Umama ke wenza inzame. We were sponsored by Lotto. Gave 5.1 million. And that's what it couldn't do. So emotional. By vandalize. The second best and standardized clinic there. Ibinhle ine toilet na yonke into. Yeah, the hooligans is just I did want to know bathutha bazizwe khona into abayenzayo. ngibone isiqiniseko bazijuju nezijuju bezikhona lapho uyabona bazikho bayaqhubeka le Flat Rock Clinic some of the friends zakhe beze ukuza nje just bazojika babone uba wenze ntoni they remain sisahawini. Everything in Brantford, as I said earlier on, it was just there was that change. And the children, if any child is passing through Winnie's house, being dirty or uncombed, Winnie would just follow after school, say, you must come here after school. Winnie would follow that child to her home, to go and speak with the mother, and then say, Mama, you must get to my house. So the children were so nice, even the appearance of those children were so nice. Progress, they were progressing very well. Because if they're having no books, no what, the children, they know that my mother is not working and so on, but Winnie would buy books, everything that is needed.
That is a song that radical black feminists sing when it seems like in Yobana, I know, we get strength just by singing about her name. We also have a problem of just being all about words in this country. Oh, she multiplied. Oh, Mama Winnie this. Oh, that. But really, how are we literally multiplying? How is that multiplying becoming impactful in changing society in the sense of the things that Mama Winnie stood for? And that's what we need to do. We need to continue raising the flag of Mama Winnie. Her name must never be erased. Like, I refuse for that woman's name to not be in the history books. If it wasn't in the books of Apartheid, we must put it in our books that our children and grandchildren will read about her name. It's about time we start, not being enablers of the erasure of women who fought, and who really contributed to where we are today. And she's one of those women that we must never make sure that Ikama like it is not erased. And we must build in her name, write in her name, tell stories in her name, create plays in her name, go out and advocate in her name, and many other women that she also stood with. And I believe that that's how Mama Winnie will multiply, because when we are also gone, other kids will see plays and see writings and whatnot of her and continue to multiply in her spirit.
False truths cross an uncrossable boundary in the realm of paradox. A lie is a lie, and a truth is a truth. Irrefutable existence, and yet they refute. That the land of the Sutu, tribe led by an unshadowed widow, flattened by the all-knowing trespasser, using God's name in vain, using so-called false truths of a land uninhabited, and the non-existence of a black woman who led, whose noble rule of truth that shamed them down to the exposure of their lives.
I think that film really exemplifies Lebo's words earlier, learn, unlearn, relearn. I feel like there was so much history in that film, so much I didn't know that we're coming to terms with. And what I really loved about it is it's taking us in a practical direction. What are we doing? What does it mean to say things like, she multiplied? If Twiggy and Palesa are here, could you please stand? And Mam Nora, please. Please as well. you know. We are the custodians of our culture. We're the custodians of our stories. And today really exemplifies the power of what stories have the ability to do. The power of what it means when we work past hashtags. When we get in a room together, when we discuss, when we disagree, when we evaluate what a legacy can really, really mean. And in order to reflect on this film, I'm going to invite Tekano Lifelong Fellow Patrick Mdletshe to the stage, and he will be in conversation with Qhawekazi Maqabuka, Makgoale Magwentshu, and Judiac Ranape.
Sanbonan. If we had time, I would have actually asked you to join me to sing, but because of interest of time, actually I wasn't able to do that. Siyabonga kakhulu, thank you very much. I won't want to say welcome again because already you've been welcome. But for me as a man, I think it's really, really an honor to be here to share the stage with you. I think then that it means a lot for me. Cela sibanikeze izandla. Probably for me, what does it mean in indaba kaMama Winnie Mandela as a 45-year-old man? I've seen a bit of both the past and the present, not yet the future. So just to reflect one part, Umama Winnie said once, it never made sense back then when she was asked, what does it mean, freedom for South Africa right now? And then she said, probably the people that were negotiating on our behalf, they over-negotiated. It took me almost 20 years to understand what she meant. I only see it now. Uguti, probably we were sold in that table. Without further ado, allow me to give an opportunity to my people that are here, Makgoale, just to introduce yourself, then we get into the business of the day.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Judiac Ranape. I'm a comprehensive health trainer for the Department of Health. I'm an abortion provider, and I'm a third cohort Tekano Fellow for Health Equity.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Makgoale Magwentshu. I work for IPAS South Africa as a senior health capacity building for sexual and reproductive health, policies, abortion, and contraceptives. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Qhawekazi Maqabuka. I am a lecturer, a researcher at the University of Nelson Mandela University, and a PhD candidate, with my research being in the sociology of health. Thank you.
Thank you. The South African health system is one of the most challenged one. One of the things that we were clear about in 1994 is that this particular healthcare system was not designed for black people. One, if you go to any city, let me make an example for you in Joburg. In a 15-kilometer radius within Joburg, 15 kilometer square from Joburg, you'll only find a high concentration of hospitals within that particular vicinity. Anything that is after that, then you'll find the black people's townships, you'll find hospitals that are under-resourced, and all that. So, Makgoale, what have actually changed what are the challenges that have been faced by the healthcare workers from the past until to the present? Has anything have changed?
It's important, thank you, Chairperson. It's important that we interrogate history so as to be cognizant of the challenges that black women in healthcare were facing and are continuing to face from the apartheid era. The black women started with bare minimum and to being world-class leaders, advocates, activists, visionaries, strategists, thought leaders, carers, to list but a few of their attributes. Because of the patriarchy, we continue to witness excellent quality work that end up being erased and resistant against black women. An example is none other than Professor Thuli Madonsela. Now, the gender inequality and patriarchy has been abound as gatekeepers during the apartheid era, as I've indicated, and black women were not considered to be fit for purpose of being part of the medical education training. And they were expected by society to continue to fulfill the expected roles of taking care of their families, their husbands, and their partners. Alas, several activities prove them dead wrong. And one of those activists is none other than Dr. Mary Malahlela Kakana, who was the first black woman to be registered as a black female doctor in 1947 against all odds. Dr. Mampela Rampela is another example. She was cognizant of the value of the primary healthcare ecosystem and implemented numerous community development projects to uplift black women, and several of those projects, regrettably, suffered when she was banned. Another example is our very own Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who was instrumental in the construction and the implementation of the Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act, which was passed in 1996. You will remember that this act is considered to be the most liberal abortion law in the whole world. This law, by the way, respects women and girls' rights to exercise, without being judged, their body autonomy rights, to exercise choice on either to continue or not to continue with the pregnancy. Dr. Qhawekazi Maqabuka is the first young black woman to qualify as a neurosurgeon in South Africa, carving out her exceptional career against numerous odds. I hope you watch my lips. First young black neurosurgeon in South Africa. Now, what about nursing? Because healthcare is not about doctors only. Healthcare also involves the registered nurses and registered midwives. Now, look at this. When Bantu nursing was introduced, the lack of adequate school hindered many from entering the field, which required them to pass English and Afrikaans. That was the selection criteria, for them to pass English and Afrikaans. Now, the stalwart, Cecilia Makiwane, was the first registered nurse in South Africa, an early activist in the struggle for women and rights. She was also part of the anti-pass laws that were to be repealed. Albertina Sisulu was a trainee nurse in Johannesburg Hospital, now known as Charlotte Macheke Hospital. And she also continued to face all those challenges that employees in the work field continue to experience. I will pause.
Thank you very much. Clearly, Oguti, we are actually coming a long way, but then the fight is not yet over.
Yes.
Going back from where the 1956, who inspired that up until today, women always have been this engine. And I beg to differ to some extent, but that will be a discussion for another day. When they're talking about Mandela no Winnie, Mandela was a project. And we may talk until cows come back home. Mandela was a project. So when we say Mandela was a project, he was made to be like that. And then the question that we need to ask for the future is a question as to why they silence Umama Winnie Mandela within the ANC. That is another
topic for another day.
Yes, Ma'am Judith, your experience as a healthcare worker, as a nurse, have anything have changed from the past until the present? What is your experience?
Well, I'll start this discussion on race and healthcare with a personal story. I was born and raised in Meadowlands in Soweto. I've been in the Western Cape for 25 years now. I did my 4-year training at Coronation Hospital as a nurse, which is now the Rahima Musa Mother and Child Hospital. And at that time, I was the only African nurse in the class 90 among colored and Indian nurses. And a kilometer away from Coronation Hospital was the J.G. Stradham Hospital, which is now the Helen Joseph Hospital. And then we had the Joburg Jan Hospital, which is now the Charlotte Maxeke Hospital. And that's where the white nurses were training. I had actually read that then Minister of Health in the National Party, Rina Venter, had actually said to F.W. de Klerk, when de Klerk was saying to her that you should actually try and get rid of the segregation policies, that Rina actually said there were actually no laws and policies that were at hand. It was the administrators and the doctors that actually implemented this inhumane law that it must exist. It was not in black and white. Hence, there was no way of actually saying that we are going to draw up new policies for that. Now, back to my story. I lived in the nurses' home at Coronation Hospital, and we had house mothers at that time. And there was this one particular house mother, Anmita, and she tortured me for 4 years, simply because I was a black nurse. My maiden surname at that time was Molokumme. She would meet me in the corridors and say in Afrikaans, Nurse Moloko, you must look on the notice boards. Your ID number don't look like ours. The department can in any minute say you must go because you don't belong there. Yeah. At that time, I was 18. I had buried my grandmother, who I knew as a mother and father because I didn't have a mother and a father, 3 months before I entered Coronation Hospital. I was mourning, I was lost. And this is all I had, and it had to do. So you can imagine me waking up every day thinking of Anmita saying this. And I did just exactly that. For every tea time and lunch time, I went to the notice board to see when the department says I can go. And it was hard. But guess what? I grew strength from the teachings of my late grandmother. I stood tall. I studied hard. I was resilient. I worked hard. And I became one of the best nurses in that era. Now, race matters profoundly in healthcare. And society does not value black people and people that are poor. It might not be visible in our facilities now with segregation, but economic status plays a very important role within health. I do not need to go in detail on looking at how private and how people benefit that have money and how the masses do not get anything from our health system at the moment. And that is really hard as a nurse on the ground. Poverty can actually make people lose a vision of self. And I will give you an example. Our MEC for Health, whom I like very much here in the Western Cape, Noma French Mbombo, she's a midwife. She supports us dearly when we do sexual and reproductive health and attends our services and also puts a little bit of oomph for managers to can actually allow us to offer the much needed service to the women and girls. So over the weekend, the 18th and 19th, she was on a campaign trail, and one of the communities that she went to was Philippi. And when she got to Philippi, you know, we had a little bit of rain, those that are not in the Western Cape, so we had some rain. And as she was moving from shack to shack campaigning, she actually posted one, I actually would like each one of you to go on her post and actually look at that post so you can see the impact and what I'm actually trying to say to you. So she put on her Facebook page how she was actually by these shacks, and you could see how flooded the path was from a shack to a toilet. Her bodyguard actually had to take a burglar bar that was rusted on the side and put it on the ground for her to step on, just so she can come closer so that they can take pictures. I want you to just try and imagine what I'm talking about. And the women in the background, you will see when you go on her Facebook page, said to her, "Mampati, we must use gumboots to get to the toilet." The door was even used. I could imagine me in gumboots trying to squat, having water by the gumboots, and trying to relieve myself. That is so painful. Post-1994, post-apartheid, it is very, very painful. So I'm trying to bring across to you that we are still struggling with the race, we are still struggling with disparity, and our people, our poor people, are really suffering with that. When we look at the data, maternal mortality rate is very high, children are still dying, unemployment, no sanitation, no shelter, and I said to you, poverty makes people lose a vision of themselves. They don't care anymore. They wear gumboots to go to the toilet, where me and you probably don't even think twice about just walking into a nice clean toilet. Now, health and medicine is still very hierarchical, is still very patriarchal, and we are having policy makers and decision makers sitting up there, signing out guidelines, signing out policies, no monitoring, no evaluation, and they are holding no one accountable. And healthcare continues to crumble while we fail our people. And I'm saying this not because I'm reading, because I'm on the ground. Lastly, I'd like to tell you that I'm an abortion provider. I'm a Christian, very much Catholic. I've got 2 boys, 17 and 24. But it is hard because like the women that come and seek abortions, we too are discriminated against. We too are shunned. We are not supported by the departments. We are being failed all the time. But guess what? We draw strength from women like Mama Winnie Mandela. She used her voice to trample on patriarchy. She used her power to hold the women and pick them up and help where and when she could. And us healthcare providers and abortion providers, like her, we wake up every morning, COVID or no COVID, I'm telling you, today the vaccination site is short of me because we are trying to save the world. Today there's a woman that's probably struggling to get an abortion site because I'm sitting here. but we wake up every day, increase and no increase. We go out there and we service the women and girls and the LGBTI communities and the sex workers and all the key populations that we can get upon. I was just saying to someone that even the homeless sex workers know my car. They scream, "Sister Judy!" because they know that we offer the service. But my only plea or plight is to say, we are going out like Nkosazana Zuma that upheld and fought for the CTOP Act. We are growing old, we are going out, and we would like the ones, the nurses, the healthcare workers that follow us to can stay in the trail, because if we are not a movement, if we don't fight, we will continue to fail the masses until time to end. Thank you.
Thanks. Yo, my daughter. Yeah, thanks, Ma'am. Qhawekazi, history is always written by a powerful hand, which is the one that is always choose to say what is the narrative, what is the truth that need to be written back then, and also now. If you're looking at the history of women deliberately, they chose to squash and shelve the history of women and the contribution of women in South Africa. As a young person, if we're talking about the issues of health and the issues of health access and equality and equity, those are the real things, particularly for the young women today. Already you can hear ukuthi umama uthini. What are the challenges for Nina njengabantu abasha? What are your challenges as young people from now moving forward?
Okay. I want to first touch on what the speakers have spoken about. So I think even what the video did was to show us the ways in which they tried to invisibilize Winnie by creating banishment, right?
Yes.
And even having that fence and trying to segregate her, creating like a spatial boundary where she could not cross. And then when we hear about the history, we start to see that this invisibilizing then was given a political tool to invisibilize black women, the contribution of black women, where we can now say in 2020 or in 2016 that the first black neurosurgeon is here in South Africa. We start to see that thread of invisibilization. Equally, what Mama was talking about in terms of the work that nurses were doing, that there's this deep thread of invisibilizing, right? So then from my point of view, firstly, as somebody who's done research in nursing, so in 2016, I completed my master's looking at the invisible labor of nurses. So the emotional labor that they were performing. Because we must understand that there are a couple of layers, right? There's the political invisibilization, which we saw with the Winnie, and we saw with the teaching, and even the structural invisibilization. Then we also see the structural invisibilization that occurs in the work environment, creating inequity in terms of access, right? In even this idea of racial kind of hierarchy that attempts to invisibilize. But what I was then trying to do was to say, beyond the work, because you say, I still go to work every single day. I wanted to find out what kind of work were nurses doing, because it's beyond the physical. And then I started to figure out that they were performing emotional labor, but it has become invisibilized because they say that, no, you're a woman, this is something that you should be doing, but no, it's effort. I'll bring this back now to contemporary. We are in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yes.
And the question is about care. We are in the middle of a care crisis. You hear stories of patients dying in hospitals on their own. And holding onto the hands of nurses, looking at them and saying, if only someone would hold me. That is the emotional labor that nurses are doing. Beyond the physical capability of doing work, when you enter a health practitioner's room, you look to them and you say, what is my diagnosis? And the kind of emotional environment that they can create says to you whether you'll be fine or not. But what the system does is that it invisibilizes that kind of work and says that it's part and parcel of what you should do. So this is to say that the care work that is performed is layered. That in terms of the physical capability of work of the nurses, as you say, in the conditions that you're working under, they are also providing an emotional kind of labor that is beneficial for the person who's accessing the healthcare system. Does that make sense? So these are part and parcel of the invisibilizing mechanisms of women. Because my research was on nurses who were predominantly women. And we know that even with the reports that the World Health Organization has now released, 80% of your labor force is made up by nurses. So why do we not know more about the kinds of work that they are performing? To simply say that we are not capacitated is not enough. We must understand the work of women, especially black nurses. So I wasn't talking about your big names, but I was analyzing the everyday experiences of people that we encounter and their stories that they were sharing, saying that today I was a mother, today I was a social worker, but I knew that it was important for the person who faced me to see me. Women that I interviewed were women who worked in health services, abortion practitioners, and they were saying that I think I place myself in that position and say, ndingumama nam. And even what the video showed us of Winnie working with the Manyano woman, some of the women were, mama bebach, mama Manyan, saying that I'm doing this work because I think it's important, irregardless of everything else. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to be wary of the kinds of mechanisms that invisibilize women and the labor that they do. And part of that is only recognizing the physical capability of doing work and not recognizing that there's also a great emotional component of doing work which feeds into the invisibilizing mechanism of women in the workplace and even at large. So then as a person, as myself, as a researcher, that's my part to play as a young person, to write the stories of women.
Yes.
Thank you.
I feel really just talking. No, thank you. Some of the people here may know me because they are friends. We come a long way as a fellow, so we share everything and anything. My father was one of most busiest men with 4 wives, so he cannot claim what he raised me. And also my mom then was working here and there, always busy. But then I want to understand, I can feel the fire, I can feel it. Really, who are the shoulders of these women that you are standing on? Maybe if we can start with you, my lead.
Obviously, the only strong woman I'd ever known, as I said earlier, I don't know who's my mother and my father, and that is Martha Karibe Mulukumi. Now, I'm also Karibe, and she died, like I said, 3 months before I started nursing. So it always pains me to see that she didn't live to see the Karibe that came out, that never died, that is there. That integrity that I almost like caution myself. I hardly do anything wrong because I tell myself things had to be right because of her. She had so much wisdom. She was never a hugger and a kisser, but she just looked at me and I could see the love ooze out of her. And this is what has been carrying me all along. And it is on her shoulder that I rise. And it is on her shoulders that I tell myself I must be the best in everything. But I must tell you something. I had a near-death experience in January. I had COVID and I was in hospital for 49 days. I was ventilated for 2 weeks and I almost died. And COVID actually taught me something to come back because I lived on the edge. Remember, my grandmother died, Anmita was on my case. I had to have this. I knew that I had to feed myself. There was no one to look after me. So my life has always been on the edge and wanting to be perfect and do things right. But COVID said to me, no, self-care is very important. Take a step back, think about yourself, and take it easy. And that's what I'm doing, because tomorrow is never promised to any of us. So we need to do the best with what we have today. And I would also like to honor Dr. Makgoale. This woman, she's amazing. Whenever I stand in the middle of a woman with her legs open, I always think, this is what Dr. Makgoale would have wanted me to do, because she taught me how to do abortions and do SRH. And she instilled in me that you do it right or you don't do it at all. You do it like how you would want you to be treated, yourself to be treated when you're lying with your legs open. So I never forget her. Whatever I do, I always, wherever I go, wherever I teach, I say, Makgoale would have wanted it like this, and we are going to carry on like this. And I'd like to say thank you.
Dr. Makgoale.
Diphelelo bhuti.
Who are the shoulders?
Thank you. I'm super humbled, Judy. I'm super humbled. Judy, as you all know, is the star in termination of pregnancy. And working with Judy, either as a student or as a Tekano fellow, we continue to learn. And you wouldn't have gone wrong with your selection criteria by choosing one of the very best. I stand on the shoulders of a great giant. And because of that, I'm able to see beyond horizons. And one of those giants is none other than my late sorely missed, living in me, mother, Rebecca. I'm Mupedi, so Rebecca in Rampatlele, they used to call her Rebecca. So I'll just say Rebecca. Rebecca Mankgere Lerodi. I grew up in the dusty village of Rampatlele in Limpopo, Northern Transvaal, was it what it was called? Yeah, Northern Province, yes. I come from a 7-sibling family. My father was a school teacher, a school principal, but the laziest man ever. So he did not help at all in the running of the house. He was an excellent orator, excellent educator, but helping with the 7 kids was not part of his to-do list. So my mother stood on her 2 legs, of course with the help of the helpers, to raise us. And as she was raising us, she instilled in us several values, and one of them being that you have choices. And those choices will inform the consequences. So if you choose, just know that the choice is married to the consequences. So of course, in all my life, as I'm choosing, am I choosing education, and I'm choosing to be respectful, I'm choosing to obey the laws, I'm thinking of my mother who instilled that value. And my mother also taught us that rather sweat in the battle and sweat less in the game, which is a value of hard work. That hard work ultimately pays. Without hard work, it won't pay. And because she had the energy and the zeal, I'm also blessed with boundless energies. I think I'm just sucking it from her and doing the best I can under the circumstances. But of course, she was not the only one. The people that I come across, the people that God put in my way to attain my purpose on earth, also instilled in me several values. Just by looking at me when I'm attempting to achieve my goal on earth and giving me a nod, that gave me energy. I stood on their shoulders. I stood on the fact that they were there to survive all odds. And as a facilitator, I also learn from the participants that I train. I also learn from the women that we are blessed to serve when they request, amongst other things, termination of pregnancy. And on that note,
Thanks.
Amen.
Amen to that. I'm not sure if you still want to go, Qhawekazi.
It's a hard act to follow. So obviously my mother, Uzanele Maqabuka, Mahlanga. I stand on her shoulders. I obviously stand also on my late aunt, Uwazipho, whom I dedicated my master's to, who was a nurse, who influenced the trajectory that I took in terms of wanting to, consolidate this. And many other black women who have shaped my intellectual path, Dr. Tambile Masola, my supervisor, Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, my mentor, Dr. Babalo Makgoqwana, and so many other black women who have shaped my path and said that you belong in a space that wasn't designed for me, which is academia. And who have said, and who have gone out of the way to create a space for me and to provide the necessary tools to speak and to share my story and to encourage research and to, go further with life. So I stand on a lot of black women who've worked very hard in opening the doors in academia, and also the invisibilized black women whose stories I wrote about when I investigated the emotional labor of nurses in Mthatha. And even now when I think of the people, the many people who died during life esidimeni, which is also a health crisis that I'm writing about in my PhD, I hope to give voice to what happened there. So I also think that maybe as energy, that's whose shoulders I stand from, many people who deserve to have their stories told.
In conclusion, I wish this one end, but time. Judith, maybe let me start with Makgoale. Nomzamo did not die.
In vain.
What is your take?
It was said she was a remarkable leader. A great example of how we should support each other, not trample each other, not go up alone, take everybody along to make a better society. And that is what I admired about her. And she had the courage and the goals. And you heard she said, if I have to do it all over again. So it means that she had it in her. It was built in her. And one of the speakers said this morning, Brantford didn't break her. She actually went to build it, and she needed that atmosphere to actually show out her skills. Thank you.
Makgoale, she multiplied. What is your take? Is she still multiplying?
She definitely is multiplying in me today and every day. And I'm looking at the issue of servitude, because she was there to serve the people. And she reminds me of this quote that the sun doesn't shine for itself. The river doesn't drink its own water.
Oh, yes.
And therefore, Winnie Mandela's skills, knowledge, passion benefited the rest of us in the world. And I'm hoping and trying to believe that that servitude is multiplying in me. And the issue of surviving with bare minimums, that we sometimes want to have more and more so as to save. But she was able to save with the bare minimum that she had in Brantford. And that is multiplying in me, the issue of servitude. Thank you.
Qhawekazi, I'm Nomzamo.
Singayisusa nanini na? So I think when she says that, singayisusa nanini na? Resistance. And even when in Brantford they tried to create a system that banished her, to invisibilize her, essentially, and even created that fence as a spatial demarcation that this person is of no use to the community and tell other people. She still said, "Dingaisusa nanini na," but she worked behind the scenes, worked with the women in the Manyano movement to say that I can still do it. So what was supposed to invisibilize her She used that invisible labor to equip the community and shine a huge light on a community that was supposed to be silent. So to my generation,
Ladies and gentlemen, ngicela sibanikezeni ihlombe, may we give them Thank you, and thank you again. I think this particular session, also first let me thank Tekano for coming up with this particular dialogue. I think this is very, very important. As I said earlier, history is always written by a powerful hand which decide what fact, what truth that is actually captured. I don't think the current system is a one that will able to give the narrative and give the truth about the strike and the plight of women in this country. So maybe this is a beginning of many things that will come. Aman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry.